Okay, let's move on to another topic. I have Mr. Moss, is it?
Yep.
Okay, town meeting member who actually had 2 articles on his, was he first year or is that second year you've been at the town meetings?
This is the first year.
First year?
Yep.
Well, this guy is really ambitious. So since you lost both of those articles, the only question I wanted to ask you, and you could fill in whatever blank you want, are you going to have a campaign to get it so that you get one passed next year or some other year?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think bringing them to the town first step is awareness. So it's to bring these important issues to the town that are happening all around us. So if you look around different towns in the state, both of these issues are coming up, as well as, it's a national, worldwide, these issues are there. So I kind of wanted to bring it as an awareness to the town of Shrewsbury. They both have to do with, a healthy environment, right? I think all of us want a healthy environment for ourselves, our loved ones, families, and both of these are related to that. You have the ending water fluoridation that brings you to, a clean water aspect of it, and then you have the fossil fuel divestment, which is related to climate change, and that we know how that affects the environment. So we wanted to bring it first as awareness, but then, I think that's a first step, right? So I think it did bring awareness, so it came to the town meeting. I think.
But you want action.
Yeah, I'd love to have action, but it's not just me, right? This isn't. These articles aren't just about me. It's more about everybody in the town.
When other officials cannot understand what you wrote, I thought that was the silliest thing, because that's what they do in this town. They make it sound like you're an idiot because they can't understand what you wrote. The town manager says, this is a business decision. If you pass this, then I have to cut the budget somewhere else. Tonight, let's not fool around, right? But he had nobody doing a study to see how much money would cost, if anything, and loss study, for the pension plan. And so he was just prepared to think that you had an action right now and it's going to cost money, which was not the case. They couldn't get their act together fast enough to find out how much anything would cost. And so that's another deal. And then the speaker said that he thought it was just an advisory vote. There was nothing advisory about what you wrote. They even asked you. I didn't hear that come out of your mouth.
No, I didn't say it was advisory.
No, you didn't either.
No.
And so the fellow that stood up, who's married to the person in charge of the library committee, and I've heard him speak before, acted real dumb, like he couldn't understand what you wrote. I'm saying, wait a minute, that guy is highly educated. Don't tell me you can't read, And so they just did that so that everybody would be confused. If he couldn't get it, why should anybody else get it? Right?
Well, I think to those points, if you look at all of the different universities, towns, statewide effort, that is the
trend.
The trend, the stance that they're hearing. So I don't necessarily find issue with what the information they have, because that's what they're being probably presented as far as from, I think it comes really from the investment management firms that have this, are feeding them the information to say, this is going to cost us money, this is going to cost you money, this is going to be a business decision. So I think that's the information they're getting, and I think this awareness effort that I'm bringing is trying to bring another side of that story to say, well, it may be a business decision, but it's also a moral decision. It's also it's based on science. And in the financial decision, I think you alluded to it, is not just what it may impact as far as profits. If they mentioned that there's a point, I think it was a 0.2 to 0.4% loss if we divested, addresses certain aspects of the financial part. But I think if you look at some other information, maybe not specifically the information you get from investment managers, if you look at what climate change costs us all, it's only going to get more costly as the impacts of climate change worsen. So I think anything we do now is an investment in our future. So I think that's why I'm bringing it now. And actually, what what's interesting is that it's in the news. So I think in bringing this awareness, you'll find it's in the news. And I think as people may have heard it through the town meeting and the petitions about climate change, they may be more aware when they see this in the news. And I just saw this week that there is a G7 summit that they're having in Europe. And well, one of the things that they're talking about is climate change and how they want to decarbonize the worldwide economy by the end of the century. So they're already talking about phasing out the use of fossil fuels by the end of the century. So those countries are Germany, Britain, France, U.S., Canada, Japan, and Italy. You've got these big countries acknowledging that climate change is a problem, acting on the science that the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has provided to say that there's only so much of a carbon budget, the amount of carbon dioxide that we can release into the atmosphere. We've used half of that carbon budget. So I think when we talk about financial decisions, budgeting comes into that, right? Everybody in the financial sense thinks about budgeting. Well, science also has this budgeting when it comes to carbon dioxide. It says we have a budget. We know that we can emit this much carbon dioxide, and we've already emitted half of it. The trends are only increasing. So if we do nothing, we have 3 decades before we reach the end of our carbon budget. So that's 30 years is a lot of time.
Well, I tell you, the guy that runs the pension plan, the civilian advisor they have, he goes back the whole history of the Wall Street. He says they never lost any money in 200 years. They know how to play the game, and he plays it well too. And he said he's going to make an 8% gain. Everybody said, "Oh, can't possibly do it." So what happens? He does a report every 2 years. He had an 8% gain. I'm saying, give this guy another problem to solve. Find some good stocks to get rid of those other ones, and I'm sure he'll do just fine.
Oh yeah,
there's 10,000 stocks available.
Right. There's actually not a big footprint when it comes to fossil fuels in pension funds, but it's in everybody's pension fund. So when we think about it right now, we all are profiting from climate change, whether it be your own personal pension fund or if you, like for myself, I work for the state, so my money's in the state pension, where the town of Shrewsbury's workers, their pension is purchased in the same state pension. So there is a statewide effort going on to divest from fossil fuels. And it is, for me, I believe that it is a good financial decision to divest from fossil fuels because in the end, climate change will cost you more. So if the more you do now to divert away from the fossil fuels now, the more you avoid the costs in the future.
Well, I just want to point out that the teachers aren't in that pension problem. It's the town employees that are not working as a school teacher. And so since they have this many teachers and only this many employees in the rest of the town, it's a lot easier problem to solve than just looking at 900 employees in the town. But they don't get their pension fund from here; they get it from state.
Yep, and there's only about, I think it's 2 to 3% is in fossil fuels. So like you mentioned,
and they already mentioned about divesting in the pension fund from the state. I've heard that. I'm saying, well, okay, if we get on track, we'll salute and follow, whatever they have to do. Our Selco, who doesn't get controlled by the state, is doing these maneuvers with power. I'm saying, why are you doing this? He said, well, we want to do like the private companies are doing, so if they decide to put some kind of, rules on us, we'll be right with them. So, what was the last ones they built? Was the solar field got incorporated into their purchases? A water dam in New Hampshire. I said, we're not playing around with no oil-fired new units anymore. We're trying to get rid of some, and that's what they're doing. Or we just got rid of nuclear power, and everybody was afraid of that. We purchased some from them too, but
I mean, you can see that fossil fuels have already agreed that by the end of the century that will be completely phased out. And I think there is a good quote that from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, where the chairman of that has actually said it really comes down to a matter of choice. We either continue on the path that we are on, so we can continue to invest in fossil fuels and keep doing that, and possibly face catastrophic consequences of climate change, or we listen to the voice of science and act accordingly. That is really our choice. So I'm really bringing a choice to the town. I mean, really is. I think everybody has to think long and hard. What do they want to see in the future? I mean, I don't think we already know fossil fuels are not the future. If we know that, I think, well, there's a reason to act now and get out in front of that. Because at the end of the century, they're actually saying it's going to be, we'll have to phase out of fossil fuels by the end of the century. But really, we're talking in the next 5 years, we need to be really phasing down fossil fuels. Because I mentioned before, 3 decades if we do nothing. But that means in 30 years, we're going to be facing the catastrophic consequences of climate change. We're already facing consequences of climate change now. So I think there's an urgent need to act now. And so we'll be continuing the discussion on fossil fuels in the town and climate change. So as far as a follow-up. Throughout this year, I'm hoping to, there was a lot of people that came up to me and said they're very interested in the topic. So I think we'll continue the discussion. We'll have, meetings maybe monthly on both topics.
Well, you get a monthly meeting on one topic. That's really good.
Yeah, water fluoridation will have monthly meetings, and then maybe divestment will have monthly meetings, so we can keep the conversation going. Because really, it should be the top story for everybody. Really, climate change. What is more important than talking about that on a daily basis? I think everybody should be devoting some amount of time on a daily basis to think about that.
Well, we're running short on time, so I'm going to mention one of the topics I had on my list. Of course, I never get to the bottom, which is good sometimes because then I'll have something for next show. We always talk about how good the school system is, or bad, how you view it. Starting this year, Shrewsbury Senior High School was evaluated, and they said that they had a medal award of silver. They had a national rank of 746 and a state rank of 38. Now, a lot of people like to get to the top of the chain in there, but one of the reasons this particular reviewing, it was a magazine, indicated, U.S. News, sorry, I think it's a magazine too, included how much effort the schools are putting into things like advanced AP courses, okay? And the reason we scale low on that compared to hundreds of other schools is because, and I've listened to this in the school committees, the 8th grade teachers don't want to recommend putting someone into the 9th grade AP class. Like, none of them want to recommend. And so they have a very small group in the 9th grade. And that cuts back on how many courses they're going to take eventually, which is only 4 years. And so if we did sort of blindside and just say throw them all in and see what comes out, we get a much higher score. Because right now we're afraid to give them a chance. That's what it boils down to. Because the 8th grade teachers get a bad reputation if they have a lot of kids failing, because they can't fail those courses easily because they're hard. And so just to let you know, I think getting a Civil War is pretty good. When they consider all the high schools in the nation, there are other tests that they're given. We could spend a whole show on how they manage to compare us to other nations. But we have to say good night, and we'll see you again in July.